Tonight's lesson is on Genesis 7 through 9. Who read what you were supposed to read? Okay, we're good. We're still going consistent. Just remember, we have a catch-up week for next week. Next week we have a testimony night. So we don't have anything on our schedule to read for next week. So just try and take it to get caught up. You don't want to get too far behind because then it's just kind of awkward. You're going to give up, and I don't want that. I don't think neither do you. So just try and get caught up because this is a great opportunity. I know when I went off to college, I didn't know why I believed what I believed, and this is an opportunity just from the very beginning. We're working through the Word for you to know why you believe what you believe, or to just be able to see kind of what the faith is about from the very beginning. So it's Genesis 7 through 9, when the flood rages. David, are you recording, just to make sure? Okay, it's Genesis 7. I'm going to be going through chapter 7, 8, and 9. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to draw points from each one. But before we begin, just a few of the things from what we read. I'm going to give a few notes on theology. Go ahead and go next slide. Wait, go back one. Okay, no, yeah, go ahead. Go forward now. Sorry. A note just in general, and this is just something that's kind of interesting. I'm just, every week, I'm just going to say a few observations from throughout the entire text that you guys were supposed to read. So we skipped Genesis 5 because that's just like the family tree, the lineage or whatever, and Adam and Eve were the parents of Cain and Abel and whatever and whatever and whatever, and that's all that chapter 5 is. That's why we skipped it. But what's kind of interesting is what you learn from Genesis 5. They talk about how old everyone is. What a lot of people don't know is Adam and Eve were actually alive at the same time as Noah, which is kind of interesting. Like Noah, the guy who went on the ark, what you guys read, but if you do the math, Adam and Eve were actually still alive at the time of Noah. That doesn't necessarily mean that they died in the flood, but that's how short a time had passed. Well, and plus people, those biblical characters lived whatever, like 600, 700 years. So, but yeah, that's just an interesting note from Genesis 5. To go ahead and go next, some theology. Now, a lot of people kind of, especially those who have read through the Bible, kind of struggle with the character of God because the Bible says that, God is never changing. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And a lot of people look at Old Testament God versus New Testament God, and they go, Old Testament God seems like a grump. He's always inflicting wrath. He just seems like he's always angry. And then they look at New Testament God, and they're like, he just seems so loving and caring. And a lot of times people have a hard time understanding that it's the same God. And so as we're kind of going through the Old Testament, I'm going to point out a few different places, well, as often as I can, how God's character is the same throughout the entire Bible. So I handed out a few scriptures. Genesis 6:5. Who has it? That was you. Okay, go ahead and read Genesis 6:5.
The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of human heart was only evil of all time.
Okay, 6:6. Who had that?
The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled.
Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Okay, so here's what I'm pointing out. A lot of people can look at Old Testament God and they can be like, you have the New Testament God coming and he's dying on the cross for all of humanity because he loves them so much. And then you have Old Testament God and he's just wiping out the entire human population with a giant flood. That doesn't seem consistent. The reason I point out these scriptures is because it's like Moses, who was writing this, I said last week, Moses is the author of Genesis. It's like Moses is just kind of making it so obvious, like they were so evil. He says in the verse Gabe read, every single inclination of their heart was evil. Like, think of how broken our world is now, and how much, just kind of generally, people want good in our world, right? And we can see how messed up it is still, right? Well, here, in this culture, because of sin entering the world, things got so messed up and so sinful that every single thought that they had was for something evil. Like, I don't think we can begin to understand how incredibly putrid this culture was. And remember what I said last week about God being just? He is light, in him is no darkness at all. That's why he had to break the relationship with Adam and Eve. So think of how just he is and how completely putrid that culture was. Braden talked in his verse, it talked about how they were extremely violent. They were extremely violent, and every single inclination of their heart was evil. And on top of it, God was broken. He was hurting over the way humanity was. And so here's this perfectly just God, and all of humanity is completely corrupt to the point that every single thought they have is evil. And then you kind of understand it like, okay, maybe God was patient in this situation. Maybe he was being a little bit gracious. On top of it, he was hurting because of the way humanity was, because he cares about them so much. Can you imagine our culture if every single thought was evil? Like, if it was up to me, I would just wipe it out, because it's like, you're evil. Imagine a whole bunch of Hitlers running around or something. Like, every single thought was evil and violent. And so here is this patient God, just like, okay, I'm hurting from this. I have to start fresh. And so then he chooses Noah, who is like the one righteous man left. And it's kind of interesting. You get kind of how the culture influenced humanity too, because even Noah got his whole family to go with him. And the Bible never says that it was Noah and his family that were righteous. It just says Noah. And so even afterwards, after the flood, you see the sinfulness of Noah's sons. And it's just crazy. And so this culture was extremely messed up. So some theology, there is the same gracious God in the Old Testament as the New Testament. It's just the culture was so putrid, he had to start fresh. Okay, David? Here's some science and apologetics. This is something I learned in my Old Testament class. Just a few interesting thoughts. Some of them might be controversial and get me in trouble, but that's what I'm here for. It's not what I'm here for. These are just interesting thoughts, okay? I'm not a scientist. Like I said, I'm 23 years old. My major was Christian ministries. Okay, but these are just some interesting thoughts, because a lot of people will say that either you have faith or you believe in science. It's one or the other. And that's not how it is. It doesn't have to be faith against science. If God performs a miracle, we should be able to see the results of that in the natural world. You just have that in the beginning. God created all of our natural universe, and we can see our natural universe. When God performs miracles, it affects the natural world. In fact, the definition of a miracle is simply God acting towards the natural world in a way that we don't expect, him just reaching beyond. Okay, so some science. Genesis 6:12. It's kind of interesting because when the flood occurs, it says that the great deep burst open. So water was actually coming from the ground. The great water from the great deep burst open, and so water was coming from the ground, which a lot of people don't know. And it's interesting because we have stuff like plate tectonics right now. And people believe in Pangea, which is one giant land, which isn't necessarily anti-biblical or anything. But if water burst forth from the ground to flood the earth, we should see the results of it. And I think you see if that much water pressure was built up and exploded, it would make sense that the surface level of the earth would crack into different pieces for the water to burst forth, and that's where you get this plate tectonics. If you guys don't know what plate tectonics is, just ignore me. And then on top of it, you see ocean trenches all around the world from where the water was stored up from underneath and they burst forward. Okay? Floodgates of the sky were open. So it also came down from the sky. It burst forth from the ground, which flooded the earth, and it came down from the sky. So this is something that my Old Testament teacher taught me. So Noah lived to at least 600, right? We know that human life is severely shortened because of the effects of the rays of the sun. But because of our atmosphere, it protects us from many of the harmful rays of the sun. So this is just a general thought to propose. What if there was an extra layer of atmosphere prior to the flood? And that is what crashed down, this extra layer of water that protected humans from the harmful rays of the sun, gave them extra protection so that they lived longer. Because if you look at the Bible, after the flood, everybody's lifespan is a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter until finally God, I think, says no man will live above 120 or something like that.
Days of man shall
Yeah.
be or something like that.
And so it's quite possible that there was this extra layer of atmosphere. And another support of this, too, is after the flood, God gives the symbol of the rainbow in the sky as a symbol of his promise. So prior to the flood, there was no rainbow, which could totally be contributed to this extra layer, water layer of atmosphere. One more thing that I thought was really interesting. Did you guys know that lizards never stop growing until they die? Lizards continually grow until they die. So what would happen if humans were living 600 years? How big do you think lizards would get with this extra protective layer of the atmosphere?
Whoa.
Maybe the size of a dinosaur? Huh? I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so another thing he threw in there, for those of you who believe that the earth is extremely young, my Old Testament teacher believed that the earth was young, and one thing that he said was, when you consider that the water level reached the point that the highest mountain was 15 cubits of water, I think I said that right, it was underneath water, 15 cubits above the highest mountain peak. There is no way to know what that type of water pressure would do to the earth. So people look at the earth and they see fossils and these layers and the way that things have broken down. They say, it looks like the earth is thousands of years old. And he would say, well, we don't know what that amount of water pressure, how it would break things down to make it look like it was thousands of years old. Like, people can't even swim to the bottom of the ocean because the water pressure is so strong. People can't even send equipment to the bottom of the ocean because the water pressure is so strong that it breaks everything that's down there. So imagine if water was so high that it was 15 cubits above the highest mountain peak. We have no idea what that would even do to all of the terrain to make it look much older. Is it a short question?
It's more of a comment
'Kay.
on the Pangea part,
Uh-huh.
or in my international studies part, because we're saying Africa.
Uh-huh.
And so, it's supposed to be that South America and Africa were together, because half of the rainforest that should be in Africa is in Brazil, where that would connect to Africa, where the rest of the rainforest
Yeah,
is.
yeah, it's all pretty interesting. Many cultures have many legends about great floods. And if a flood of that magnitude actually occurred on Earth, there's no way that multiple cultures wouldn't draw from that. They wouldn't have their own legends, their own histories about a great flood. And there are many that do. And it's kind of funny because a lot of people point to those other religions and they're like, see, Christianity just copied off of these other religions because they wrote their history down first and they wrote the flood. And that's just kind of stupid. That's like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I flick my Bible. David says, yeah, Paul flicked the Bible hard. And I'm like, I flicked my Bible lightly. And then you guys believe David because he said it first. It's like, just because it's older doesn't mean that it's more true. Everybody's going to have histories, and just because the Christian religion wrote down their history a little bit later than the earlier, you're going to say that the It's not like a race. It's not like whoever gets there first is the rightest. What?
Also, they were enslaved for like
Intelligent.
400 years.
Yeah.
So how could they write down
Yeah,
history?
exactly. They were enslaved for a very long time. Okay, so then Genesis 7:19. I've always struggled with the fact. Think of how many animal species there are across the world, and I'm like, and God tells Noah to put 2 of every single kind of animal on the ark. That's ridiculous. There's no way. I don't care how big the ark is. It's a worldwide species around the world. There's no way. And this is where I point to microevolution. Now, a lot of Christians get scared of this because it has the word evolution in it. Okay. So, did you guys learn about Darwin and his finches? About how they have different shaped beaks based off of the different islands and the diets that they were supposed to have? Okay. That would be microevolution. It's an animal evolving slightly so that they can survive. And there's tons of proof of it. That microevolution in no way is counter to the Bible, in any way. A species kind of changing to survive. Now, macroevolution is where you get a gorilla turning into a human being, where you have something changing its entire species over a period of thousands of years. That's much different. And actually, Darwin himself said if macroevolution, he just put it all in the same category of macroevolution. He said, if it's true, there should be sufficient fossil evidence. And even up to now, like I learned at Metro, which is a secular college, they were like, the amount of skeletal proof for macroevolution fits in the back of a pickup truck. This is why they're always finding the missing link. It's like, this one skull is the link to prove that all humanity came from this. No. Thousands of types of species would have to die off in order for a new species to arise from it. There should be tons of fossil evidence, and there's not like any. So, and then I'm going to throw one little minor note. There are Christians who believe that God used macroevolution. So just, if you're really convinced on macroevolution, don't let that get in the way of your relationship with the Lord. That's not what's most important, okay? Okay, so those are some science and some apologetics. Oh, so anyway, microevolution, sorry. So if microevolution is a thing, and you have the beginning of the world, there was not a whole lot of time for animals to change slightly. You wouldn't potentially have a lion and a tiger and a whatever. Maybe there was just one type of cat at that time, which makes the species list a lot shorter in order to fit on the ark. Does that make sense? Yeah, so those are just some interesting thoughts, some science, some apologetics to kind of make sense of some of these. I don't know if you guys think of these natural questions that pop up in your head while you're reading this. I was like, how could God fit all of the species on here? Well, maybe the species weren't as varied as they are today because there wasn't as much time for the microevolution to work its effect and create all these different, a lion and a tiger and a panther. Maybe it's just one big cat. I don't know. Okay. So now let's get to our lesson. Those are just some footnotes.
That wasn't it?
No. Those are just some
Tidbits.
yeah, mental notes, some interesting observations. Hey, it's Laura. Okay, so I'm going to go to Genesis 7:17 through 24. I'm going to read it for you. Then the flood came upon the earth. Okay, so God tells Noah to build the ark, and because he says he's going to flood the population because it's so wicked that even the inmost, every single thought they had was evil. So he's like, I'm going to wipe it clean. Noah, build this ark, put all the species on it. I'm going to flood the earth. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark, so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So God kills everything. He wipes it all clean. And when reading this, it's kind of easy to just kind of read it from a distance and just be like, okay, so God wiped everything clean. But what I want us to do here is I want everyone to put yourselves in the shoes of Noah. Like, just this week, I kind of like early fall because it always rains. I like to sit back and actually just kind of like have the lights off, just enjoy the natural light. I like jazz. I'll listen to some jazz and I'll just sit there and I'll relax in kind of my own space. Everybody kind of in your life, you have places that are what was the word I asked you for?
Sentimental.
Yeah. They have kind of these places and these things that are sentimental to them. Like, think of, I don't know, if it's maybe your bedroom. Like, it's like a safe place for you there. I think of actually the room back there. It's now David's room. For a little while, it was my room. And in June, there was just one time when it was like God was really moved like every single day. And it was just kind of like the afternoon sun came in and there's the sound of the cicadas. And it's just like you're praying. And it's like God moves in those places and in those times so that those places kind of become special to you, you know? And when I like reflect back on all the good times, I kind of think of that room and the way the light comes in, and it's just like, it like affects me. And that's not a bad thing. God is a good father who wants to bless us. And we have those things in our life. We have those places. I even think of like Estes Park in Colorado. Right now, things are happening in Estes Park. And during the summer, I'll go on vacation there, and it's kind of the same place. I know that it's safe. I know that it's, I had good times there. What do you have in your life that's just like, kind of like special? Those places where God moved. We know that Noah was he was the only righteous man left on earth. Can you consider being Noah? God asks you to go on this ark. And it's not like Noah was just alone all the time. I'm sure he had relationships with these people who were evil and probably cared about them. It's not like he just lived entirely alone. He was a human. Think of the people that you have relationships with that maybe aren't living godly, but that you care about a lot. Everything. All those places that were special to the Lord, all of those people, he had to be in that ark just alone with his family and have all of his life wiped clean. Everything. Like I think of that room back there, and I think of like if God asked me to walk onto this ark and everything that I knew would be wiped clean. Like way underwater, completely destroyed. Can you imagine being Noah there? Like that would be so heartbreaking. Everything that you knew just completely destroyed. All these people, all these places, these things, your home. And then on top of it, David, go ahead and go next. And the waters receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days the water decreased. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains. He was on this ark with this crazy storm and flood for like more than a third of a year, as everything that you knew and you loved was completely destroyed. And this is where I get kind of the title, When the Flood Rages. I know that during that time, I would be really struggling with my relationship with the Lord. Like, God, why? You're almost completely alone except for your family. Everything wiped clean. Completely destroyed. And you're there for a third of a year just on this boat in a storm. That would really suck. Okay, but here's what's so cool about it. The flood recedes, and we go to the next slide. Then God said to Noah, and I'm going to actually read from my Bible. We're now in Genesis 9, 8 through 117. 8 through 17. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you, and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth, I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood. Neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember that everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Okay, we're going to talk here about a covenant real fast. Covenant isn't really a word that we use in our culture very much. And I wish I could give you a word that's similar, but there really isn't any. So I'm going to give the definition of covenant. A covenant is more permanent than a loving emotion, but it's more loving and emotional than just a contract. It's the permanency of a contract combined with love. It's saying, I promise to love you no matter what. It doesn't matter if we have disagreements. It doesn't matter if you hurt me. I am going to set up this covenant with you so that I am loyal to you. Remember last week how I said that throughout all of the rest of the Old Testament, God would continually strive to have relationship with humanity? This is where God does it with Noah. He says, I am making a covenant with you. I'm making a promise to love you and to never destroy anything again. And I'm going to put this rainbow in the clouds as a sign to remind you that I will not destroy the earth ever again. Can you imagine being Noah now? Because as much as I have these things in my life that I'm sentimental about, and as much as I care about different people and all this, at the same time, I'm constantly struggling with how wicked the world is. I'm constantly frustrated with the way that people treat other people and all of this darkness in the world, right? And so here's Noah, and he's on the ark, and he doesn't know exactly what God's going to do next. All he knows is God is destroying everything he knows. And so, but what God's plan was after I wipe clean this sin-infected people so I can start fresh, I'm going to set up with the one righteous man left a covenant relationship so that I can enjoy relationship with humanity so that nothing will get destroyed again. And so now you have Noah stepping off of the ark, and before he has no idea why everything's getting destroyed, and now God's saying, I'm going to have a covenant relationship with you. And Noah was the only righteous man left. He was the only righteous man left. Who knows what his prayers looked like for this evil generation around him? And then he steps off the ark, and it's like, finally, I have this relationship. God is speaking to me because he wants this covenant relationship. He is promising to not destroy everything because we are going to be in relationship with each other. And once again, you probably read it, humanity broke this covenant again, and wickedness kind of starts spreading from there, and we'll get into more and more times where God is doing everything he can to just like claw for this relationship with humanity, and how humanity keeps breaking it. But here's kind of the main point. when you are going through a flood in your own life, when you're going through these difficult times, it's not your job to sit there on the ark and to go, God does not know what he's doing. How is he possibly going to make this situation any better? Imagine being Noah. You'd probably be sitting there going, he's destroying everything. He can't, there's no way he can make something good out of this. And then he steps off the ark and God's like, I promise I'll never do it again. And I want this covenant with you. I want this relationship with you. And suddenly it makes sense. So when you're going through these difficult times, God knows what he is doing. And at the end of the flood, at the end of all these difficulties, there will be this rainbow. There will be this promise, this covenant, this relationship that he will have with you. Gonna, again, go across the entire scope of the Bible. Always point to Jesus. Jesus took the flood on himself. He took the punishment. All of humanity before completely got wiped out. Instead, now with Jesus, God's like, I am going to completely destroy myself so that I can have this covenant relationship with people. And so in the same way that Noah stepped off of the ark after everything was destroyed, he could start clean, start with this fresh palate. In the same way Noah stepped off the ark and could enter into this covenant relationship with God, we can do the exact same thing through Jesus. Before, God destroyed the entire earth so that he could enjoy a covenant relationship with us. Now, he destroyed himself so that he could have a covenant relationship with us. The same opportunity in front of Noah lies in front of us. So enjoy that covenant relationship. God does it through the entire Bible. Going to keep pushing that.